It was dark outside by the time my friend and I made it to the sleepy downtown blocks of our little city in Oregon. Our babies were home with their fathers, and after the diaper snack rhythm of mothering all day, we were glad for a chance to take a walk together and grab a cup of tea. Just the two of us. The streets were pretty empty at that hour. Shadows were spilling out from the alleys between the buildings. The street lights were like dim spotlights on the sidewalks. You get the scene. We had just passed a brick building on our left, and we were almost to the other side of its darkened parking lot when my friend stopped walking and totally lost it. "Oh my God," she said. "Oh my God. Oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. Oh my God." "What? What is it?" I asked her. "Oh my God," she replied. "What? What?" She was breathing quickly. Her hand was on her chest. Her face was going pale. She pointed over her shoulder behind us. "There's a body hanging from the side of that building," she said. "I think someone committed suicide." I squinted at the wall we'd just passed. Through the darkness, I could see the shape of a body and the clear vertical line of a rope going up from the head area. My friend and I ducked into the entryway of the next business, and with that terrible scene out of sight, I called 911 on my cell phone. The operator wanted a lot of information: my name, my address, my social security number, everything, as she dispatched the fire department. When I heard them coming, I went down to the end of the block, to the intersection, and I pointed them in the right direction. Finally, they pulled into the parking lot, 2 big fire trucks, and they shined their lights on the wall, and I looked away. My friend still stood back out of sight in the entryway of the other business. A firefighter called out to me, "Hey, is that what you saw?" I raised my head. Yes. The whole scene looked different in all that light. The body looked larger than life. My brain was trying to make sense of it when the firefighter snapped, "That's a painting." Sure enough. Building belonged to a sporting goods store, and there was a mural of various outdoor activities on the side, including, near the very top of the wall, a painting of a rock climber with a rope. With a rope reaching for the top as though it were going over the summit. "Oh my God," said my friend. It was the most embarrassing thing that has ever happened to me. It was worse than the time when I was at a park with a friend and her father who spoke only Spanish, and I, a new Spanish speaker at that time, tried to say, "Look at that butterfly," it was enormous, but what I accidentally blurted out for all to hear was not butterfly, but a derogatory word for gay men. Boy, was my friend's dad surprised. That was nothing compared to the 911 incident. It was worse than the time when my daughter was 3 and we were in line at the store, and she asked in a voice way too big for her size whether I had made one of those bodily noises we try to avoid in public, and I said no, and she exclaimed, "Yes, you did." No, I didn't, but that was nothing compared to the 911 incident. Even last week during first service, when I stood at this microphone and tried repeatedly to get a family to come up during the child dedication as they stared blankly at me, and I finally realized that they were not the family of the baby we were dedicating, and not only that, but I had already dedicated their beautiful baby last year. Even that was nothing compared to the 911 incident. And oh, I could go on. I've got more. I tell you, the good thing about a really big embarrassment is that it makes everything else you do to embarrass yourself seem real manageable. It was even more embarrassing than the fact that we spelled the word embarrassment wrong on the church sign this week. Did you guys see that? How's that for irony? Has anything like that ever happened to you? Have you ever been so embarrassed about something that every time you remembered it, you found yourself going like this, hiding your face in your hands? I hear it, enthusiastic yes over there. What a terrible feeling, embarrassment. The feeling of intense discomfort with ourselves when others witness us in a socially unacceptable act or condition. A social phenomenon. Intense discomfort when others witness us in a socially unacceptable act or condition. We're such social creatures, profoundly, evolutionarily, existentially dependent on each other, delightfully, painfully social. We learn from each other, we give each other our names, and through our relationships with each other, we even experience transcendence. Do you know? When this life ends for you, what of any meaning will be left? People's memories of you, the love you gave, your relationships. And so it's no wonder that when we feel others have seen us doing something socially awkward or unacceptable, whether it's walking around with your fly undone or tripping on the sidewalk or talking with food in your teeth. I don't have any food in my teeth, do I? It makes us really uncomfortable. And you can fill in the blank. If I haven't said your embarrassing thing out loud yet, it doesn't mean that it's worse than all the others. But man, we can be so hard on ourselves when we mess up. Worse than anybody else would be. You know the negative self-talk. Maybe sometimes you even roll your eyes at yourself or shake your head as though it were so predictable that you would embarrass yourself. But because it's a social experience, one of the best remedies for embarrassment is social too, and that's hearing others' stories and sharing yours. I'll bet next time you embarrass yourself, you'll remember my 911 incident, and I hope it helps take the edge off. Actually, the way I coped back then was I went to the library and I checked out a book that featured stories of famous people embarrassing themselves. Like when George H.W. Bush was at a dinner in Japan and tossed his cookies right there at the banquet table in front of the Japanese Prime Minister. You guys remember that one, many of you, I'll bet. Do you know that that incident has its own Wikipedia page? It's awful. Or when Vice President, and maybe he was a candidate back then, Dan Quayle, spelled the word potatoes wrong on a chalkboard as he visited a classroom full of children. I was a child back then, and I remember that one straight out of the evening news. And there have been some more recent ones. Think of Janet Jackson's Super Bowl wardrobe malfunction. Her strap broke, and there she was. Hearing others' stories is a good reminder that we all are just human, and we should just get over our gaffes. In fact, we can see them as gifts to the other mere humans around us, most of whom are just as embarrassment-prone as we are. And most of the time, that's enough, and we get over it. Only sometimes it isn't, and we don't. Sometimes self-consciousness and just the fear of embarrassment, including the fear of rejection, starts to get too much power in our lives. Sometimes that is enough to keep us from doing certain things, like dancing, for example. Even when we feel our feet tapping and we know we want to. It can keep us from singing with gusto during hymns, even though the song means something to us. Or it can keep us from speaking in public, even though we have something to say that others need to hear. Embarrassment can keep us from trying to form a relationship with someone we admire, or even from taking care of ourselves. A synonym for embarrassment is mortification, as in, I was mortified. Mortify, which means to cause death. And we probably all know what it's like to feel as though we are dying of embarrassment. Scientists know that sometimes people do die of embarrassment, not from extreme blushing or increased heart rate, but because they let embarrassment prevent them from getting treatment for an illness or an addiction. This is where embarrassment gets tied up with something else: shame. Embarrassment and shame are related, but they aren't the same. Embarrassment is discomfort when others witness us in unacceptable circumstances. It's uncomfortable, but in a way, it has a redemptive aspect built right into it. It's redemptive in its own way, because revealing that you're embarrassed, even inadvertently, shows others that you care about what is socially acceptable. And that's what matters. Usually we can laugh later at something that's embarrassing, even if it takes a while for the discomfort to wear off. Everybody has embarrassing stories, and we bond over them. And they're humbling, and we need that from time to time, too. Shame, on the other hand, is more alienating and harder to recover from. Shame has moral and existential dimensions. While embarrassment is something that happens around other people, shame is something you can feel even when you're alone. Embarrassment is public, but shame can be private. Embarrassment has to do with what happened, but shame has to do with who and what you are. Some of you might be familiar with the work of Brené Brown. She's a social psychologist and a researcher who gave a speech at a TED conference that went viral. It was called "The Power of Vulnerability." In it, she tells the story of a research project she did on connection, which is the thing, she says, that gives meaning and purpose to our lives. Connection. She wanted to understand it better. But she says the thing that happens in these qualitative research studies is that people tell you about the opposite of whatever you're asking about. If you ask them about love, they'll tell you stories of heartbreak. If you ask them about belonging, they'll talk to you about feeling excluded. And when she asked about connection, she says she was surprised to find that people kept telling her stories about shame. Shame, she says, is the opposite of connection. It is the fear of disconnection. Shame is the fear that others will find out that you are in some way deeply flawed. It's the fear, or maybe what you think of as the secret knowledge, that you are not actually a very nice person, or that what happened when you were a child has left a permanent stain. It's the fear that your working-class upbringing will accidentally reveal itself in, quote-unquote, polite company. I know that one. Or that you have something you did not earn and that should not belong to you, like white privilege, for example. Something that will make others angry with you. And you are afraid of that too, and of not knowing what to do. There are many ways shame can manifest itself, but what all cases have in common with each other is the deep down, often unarticulated belief that you are not worthy. Not worthy of the deep and authentic companionship of other people, or of being loved by someone who's happy and well-balanced. Not worthy of mentorship or encouragement. Not worthy of being called elder in the wonderful spiritual sense of that term. Even very successful people experience shame. Don't be fooled by appearances. Ambition itself can be a mask for shame. Not always, but sometimes. The higher we climb in life, the greater the shame we may feel that we are not worthy of such a position. The more successful we are, the more likely we are to feel that failure is inevitable. And the more we are admired, the more that shame can double over on itself, because successful people think their shame itself is shameful. They should not struggle with such things, they think. And yet to be human is to be imperfect. Who was it that taught you that your imperfection was worse than everyone else's? That something you did or something that happened outside of you could diminish your worth when you have inherent worth and dignity. This week, I was at a festival of homiletics in Atlanta, Georgia. It's a preaching festival. And I heard a Lutheran preacher say that she briefly considered being a Unitarian Universalist back when she was in divinity school. but she thought that UUs were too optimistic about the goodness of human beings. She was struggling with the aftermath of addiction and alcoholism, and she wasn't sure that Unitarian Universalism had room in it for the human capacity for self-destruction. What I think is that she was surrounded by young seminary students who had not yet had a chance to experience their lives being broken into pieces and glued back together again. Or maybe they were too ashamed to talk about the ways in which they were broken. But in either case, what I want you to hear this morning is that when we UUs say in our first principle that we affirm the inherent worth and dignity of all people, we are not glossing things over. We're not overlooking your or anyone else's capacity for harm or self-destruction or self-loathing. We aren't forgetting about addicts or bad parents or obnoxious relatives or even convicted criminals. That's why we feel the need to say it out loud. If we were only talking about sweet little old ladies and adorable children, we wouldn't need to say it at all, would we? As if any little old lady were just 100% sweet. Huh? I don't plan to be. Yeah. What we're talking about in our first principle is the deep sense of unworthiness that is at the heart of so much bad behavior, and that prevents us from connection with others. And the reason it is our first principle is because shame and shaming are so common. What a painful state of being for such a bunch of inherently social creatures. Brené Brown says that what she discovered in her research is that the only difference between people who have a strong sense of love and belonging and those who do not is shame. She says people who have a strong sense of love and belonging believe that they are worthy of love and belonging. The thing that leads us to feel deeply alone is the fear that we're not worthy of connection. And shame, in turn, diminishes the resiliency we need in order to get through life as a bumbling human being, prone to embarrassment and vulnerability. What we need instead of shame is the courage to just be imperfect. We need the courage to be imperfect in an imperfect world that needs us to be fully present. We can't be compassionate with others if we don't treat ourselves kindly. Not really. We need to muster up enough shamelessness to speak up and to insist on respect and to make art and to sing our own songs with gusto. We need to be shameless about saying, I'm not perfect, and about saying, here's what I know, and about saying, I love you first. We need to be shameless about reaching out to the stranger, even if they might not like us or might trick us. Have you ever failed to help someone in need because, although there was no evidence, you were worried that they were pulling one over on you? And is that not an example of the fear of being embarrassed by your own foolishness, preventing you from living your life out of the essence of who you are? So I've got a message this morning for everybody who struggles with shame of some kind, and in my experience, that's a good 95% of us at least. It's a message direct from God, and it goes like this: stop it. Free yourself. You were made for loving and for joy and for reaching outside of yourself. It's a daily practice, letting go of shame. If therapy will help you, get some. It's a useful resource. I've used it at times in my life, and I commend it to you. But in the end, I promise, none of us is perfect, and you won't be either. Ever. So get ready to embrace what you might call holy folly. The willingness to be a fool, absurd, wrong, and flawed, in service to something higher, in service to love, joy, and connection. In the Christian Bible, in one of Paul's letters to the Corinthians, Paul imagines his God, saying, "My grace is sufficient for thee. My strength is made perfect in weakness." Love's grace is sufficient. Love's strength is made perfect in weakness. In our Unitarian parlance, what this means is that we are all broken and we are all whole. We're all sinners and saints all at the same time. And this is what makes the compassion and the love that flows through us and to us all the more richer and more beautiful. And let the people say, amen. Let's rise in body or spirit for our closing.